Hey everyone, and welcome to week 7 of this course. So let's go ahead and get started. So today's topics are going to be about database interactions from our application to the actual database, and how to make CRUD statements through the data access layer, so like stored procedures or inline queries. So for database interactions, so what you need to have is, first you need to set up a connection to your database. So you do this by going to your web config and creating some app settings where you're able to easily access this connection string throughout your application. And I'll show you guys how to use this. And I've provided a link here that that you can go to that has a whole bunch. You tell it what database you're interacting with, and it will spit you out that that connection string for you. So if you don't know what your connection string should be, go to this website and check that out. And I'll also demonstrate that for this. And then the other thing that you'll have to do is you'll have to install and import the MySQL.data NuGet package. So I'll show you guys how to do that as well. And when you install that NuGet package, you'll have the ability to use the MySQL connection, MySQL command, and MySQL data reader. Actually, I think that's a misspelling. I think that should be data reader or reader. I'm not sure. We'll see. And what those are used for is to interact with your database in your application. So the steps to actually interact with your application is open up a connection from your application to your database. So first things first, you have to open up that connection. Then once you've opened up the connection, you can make a command that opens up a query. You can do a query within this command that you can hit up your database to retrieve, data or insert data or whatever. But you do that with a command, and in the command you can write inline queries. You could access stored procedures, views, functions. It doesn't matter. The command is essentially you creating that query to your database. And then the reader, the MySQL reader, is used to return results. So let's just go over this slide real quick before I go any further. So let's access this this connectionstrings.com. So here you can see that we have a whole bunch of different databases to interact with. Like you have MySQL here, you have SQL Server for the Microsoft SQL, T-SQL stuff. You have a whole bunch of different database connections that you could do. We're going to be using MySQL connection, so I'm going to go ahead and click that. And here, if I scroll down, you can see that there's a standard connection string here, and then we have other types of connection strings. But for what we're doing, we just need the standard connection string, so that's fine. So there's that. Now let me go into importing that NuGet package. So what you'll want to do is you'll want to right-click on your project or your solution. We only have one project, so right-clicking on either is fine. Click on Manage NuGet Packages, and this window will pop up. You'll want to browse for MySQL.data, and this is the one that you're going to want to install. So I've already installed it, but anyway, this won't be installed for you, so just install it, and you should be good to go. The only thing after you've installed this NuGet package is you'll have to import those libraries over to whatever page you're interacting with, whatever class you're interacting with. And so that kind of looks like this. So let's go into my user BLL, not BLL, user DAL, and you'll see here that I have imported. Now that did it automatically for me, but it imported MySQL.data. There's a fly. MySQL.data, my SQL client. So here, let's imagine, because you guys won't have this to begin with. So let's say that you write all of your connections and stuff like that. You can see that they're highlighted here in or under like they're underlined in red. So when you're creating this, you'll get this issue. So either hover over it, click Show Potential Fix, and then click on this. And what that's going to do is it's going to bring that right back in. Let's just undo that. Or, you can Alt Enter and then just click. And that will import that library over for you guys. So that's how you import that library. Now let's kind of dive into how to hit your database from your application. So let me show you guys an example here. Actually, let's rewind a little bit. I'll show you guys the web configuration. So if you let's collapse all just to make it nice and easy to see. If we go here to our web config, you'll see that I added right underneath. So before this wasn't there, right? You guys won't have this there. So what I did was I went over here to the top, right below configuration. I hit enter, below configuration and above system.web. And I typed this, app settings. Now what this is essentially like a dictionary, you can think of it as. It has keys, and you can name this whatever you want, whatever setting you want. Now this is usually for static things. So things that like aren't going to be changing at all in your database or in your application, such as connection strings. And if they do change, then it only requires you to change it in one spot. And I'll show you guys why that is in a second. And so anyway, we're creating like a bogus thing here. Value, A. So let's say that we actually wanted this to be a link to Google site. So now I can make a reference to this anywhere in my application. Like let's say we go to log out, and I'll just do it here on the page load just to show you guys an example. String Google page equals. So what we have to do in order to access this web configuration, we do this. So web configuration manager. It's going to underline it as red. Again, hit Alt Enter or hover your mouse over it. Alt Enter, and using system.web.configuration. And then dot, and then app settings, and then bracket, and now we have to give it the key name. So right here, what goes in here is this Google site. And what that's going to do is it's going to take the value for this key, which is the website, Google, http google.com, and it's going to assign it to here. So now we can use Google page throughout we can use this throughout our entire application. And let's say Google site domain ever changes. We don't have to change it in every single place now. We only have to change it here. So what you put in here is really more for static things. Anyway, so I'm going to undo everything that I did and bring back my old connection string. And then I'm actually going to delete this here too because we don't need this. So here you can see that I added a key of constring, and I've given it the value of what was on the connectionstrings.com website on that standard connection string. And here I have my server, I have my database, I have my user ID and my password. So the way that I got this was that I use so for my server stuff I use remote mysql.com. Login. Yeah, this is what I want. Okay, so I'm going to log in here. And in order for me to find out my database, I can go to databases here, and I can see that the username is listed. And let's say that I want to go into PHP My Admin. you can see here that the database name is provided to me. Same over here. And so that's my database name. And it just so happens that, well, it's not, it's standard, I guess, that my username and my database name is the same. So, so that's my database name, and that's, I just copied and pasted the database name over here, and then my username is the same. And then we got the password over here. So your password is whatever, whatever it is. So anyway, so that's kind of a quick rundown of what web config is. So now let's get into how to actually make that database connection, how to utilize the web config, and how to call that database. So here you can see that I have some basic queries. So does let's go to a login. So when a user logs in, they'll provide me the email and the password to the application. And from there, I do this SQL query. It's a normal SQL query, but I'm putting it in a string called SQL. And I'm making it multi-line like this by doing this @ symbol over here. So keep in mind that it's the same, it's the same thing as, as a SQL query. So if you want to write your SQL query first in like PHPMyAdmin or Workbench to make sure it works, then great, do that, and then copy and paste that statement over here. And you'll notice a few things within this query. You'll notice that I have an @ behind my parameters. So what this is going to do is it's going to parameterize these variables, which means that it's going to safely replace these variables against SQL injections. So so like let's say that someone types in like is trying to do SQL injection. They can do that, but it won't affect my database. It's not going to do anything. And the way that that's done is because you have the @ here, which is saying that this is a parameter. And then I'm saying that that I want to add a parameter called @email. So that's the same thing as this. I'm saying I want to replace this @email right here with whatever the user provided me with. Now, if I did something like this, so you always want to try to parameterize everything that the user inputs because you don't want any SQL injections. Now, for instance, this is great. What would be bad would be to do something like this. Inserting the thing that the user inputted directly into your query. This is bad because now they can inject bad SQL into that email address field, and they're going to be able to perform a lot of bad stuff on your database, such as dropping tables, selecting things from your tables, and viewing like people's usernames and passwords, and getting access to a whole bunch of private information. So you don't want to do that. You want to always bind your parameters wherever you can, especially when it's the user's input. So this is how I'm doing that. So first I'm creating the string. I'm preparing the SQL query. Then I'm using the using statement. The reason I'm using is because once it's done using it, it closes the connection for me and it disposes of the connection of the object. Otherwise, I would have to do this myself. But using does this by itself. So first I open up the connection like I mentioned. Let's try and make this a little bigger. I open up the connection, and you can see that this is my SQL connection. Now, if you were accessing like a Microsoft SQL database, a SQL Server database, this would just be, SQL connection, and then you would import whatever libraries that you need for that. But we're using MySQL. And we've installed that NuGet package, and so we're able to use this. So we're using, so we're creating a MySQL connection called connection. And in here, we're actually passing in, when we're creating this connection object, we're passing in the connection string. So you'll see here that it's asking me for a connection string. So I'm getting that connection string from the web config settings, from the web configs app settings. So like I showed you guys earlier, web configuration manager.app settings, and then this is the key name to the connection string. So now, and here you can see that like all my queries, all my functions that are creating queries to the database are doing this. So now if I ever were to change my database, all I have to do is change it in that one location, and all my connection strings are changed that are utilizing it. So that's the benefit of doing that. Then we have, after we created our connection, we create the command. And the SQL command, the MySQL command, accepts two parameters. It accepts a SQL string. So this is the query that you're going to be running. And it accepts the connection. Now, once you pass in the connection, you still have to open it. So I like to put everything after I put that, and again, I'm using here because it closes and it disposes of my command. And after I create my connection and my command, I like to start it out with a block, with a try block. And then I just try and then catch, and then I just throw this error into my error handler here. But after you do that, you need to open up the connection, and then you're passing in the two parameters here. So, command.parameters that add with value, and then the parameters in the query that you want to replace with the thing that you're replacing it with. So you can see that this equals this. So that's good. And then from here, we are going to be using the MySQL data reader. And so what we do with the MySQL data reader is this will help us retrieve information from our query. And what we want to do is we want to execute our command. So we have assigned our command the SQL query and the connection. So now we want to execute that SQL command and that connection in order to retrieve information. So what we first want to do after we've done that is we want to make sure that we check to see if the reader, the thing that's going to be reading that data, if there's any rows. If there's no rows returned, then there's no need to continue checking or doing anything. If there are rows returned, then you want to read it. So you'll do reader.read. And so what this does is it goes to the next line. So if you're doing this for the first time, it goes to the first line, to the first row that's returned. If you have this in a while loop, so because I have an if, it will only execute this once. So this is saying if there is a row available, read it. And so this, what it's doing is it's going through that row, and I'm saying reader dot and then get int64. This is resembling a long, and then I have this extension here, but for you guys it would be get string. So this will get if this column was a string in your database, then you would want to get it as a string and then pass it in here. And what these are just the properties within my object, within my user's object here. And what I'm doing here is I'm just mapping the columns. What these are the columns in the database, and I'm just mapping them to their corresponding property in my object. And so now I'm populating this object, right? And with all this data. And I'm able to get, the user and the address all at once because I'm doing this inner join here. And retrieving that information like that. Now, let's say that you had, so I'm only interested here in returning one ID. I'm just interested in making sure that the user exists and then returning that user. But let's say that you wanted to get multiple users. So what you would do, instead of an if reader.read, because this if will only happen once, is you convert that to a while. You change that if and you put that, you change that if and you make it a while. So this is saying, so this is my get users function that, you pass in a list of user IDs. And this is saying that, and by the way that I did this is, since user IDs is coming from me, the developer, and not from the actual user interacting with my website, I'm directly replacing the user IDs here. So I'm doing this, and then I'm doing SQL, and then SQL.replace, and then user IDs, and then I'm just joining this this list. And that's okay because the user of the website won't be able to interact with this in this way. But when you're taking in their direct information like this, the information that they put in, like their email and password, then you want to parameterize it. But anyway, so because I want to get a list of users, because I'm being passed in a list of user IDs, I don't just want to get one user, I want to get multiple users. So I have this while loop here. So if the reader has rows, then while it's reading, so now it's going to go through each row and it's going to do this. So I have a list of users here. So for each user, it's going to create me a new user and map that user's information from the database to the properties, to the object's properties. And then it's going to go to this user object. Then it's going to go ahead and it's going to add this user object to my users list. And it's going to do that for each user that gets returned from the database. And that's kind of how you write your statement. If you want to write, let's say, an insert statement, you would do the same thing. Insert into addresses, and then I have here select last inserted ID because I want to get that ID of what I just inserted, because I'm going to be doing stuff with it. And so I execute scalar. What scalar is it returns, if you're only returning one row and one column, you can execute scalar because it gives you better performance, rather than using SQL data reader. So I bring that into, I execute that, I convert that to a string, bring that in, and then if it's an address, then I assign it the ID. If it indeed executes that query and it returns an address, I assign it that ID. Otherwise, you could do something like this. If you didn't want to return anything, like let's say that you didn't have this here, right? Or let's say that you did, but you didn't care and you just didn't want to return anything, or you didn't care about what was being returned. You would do something like this. So you would do command.execute non-query. What this means is that you want to execute this command, right? That has this SQL statement and the connection, but it's not a query. You're not querying anything. You're just doing something with it, such as an update or an insert. But again, I don't have that there. I have execute scalar. I could have SQL data reader instead if I was returning other stuff, but I just have execute scalar because I am interested in returning the ID of what was just inserted. And this is how you do that. So so that's essentially how you would interact with your database. And so let's just quickly walk through this. Let's see what happens when I log in. So I'm going to set a breakpoint here. I'm going to start the application. All right, and I'm opening up Workbench too, just while we're at it. All right, so my application loaded. And so let's go here and let's select this, select all from users. You'll see here that I have a few, users here. So I'm going to log in with this guy. And let's say that the username is, the username right now is this, and the password is test. So I'm going to go ahead and do just, random text, log in, goes here. I set the breakpoint here. So now I'm going to F10 through this. And let me just show you guys this in the watch. So you'll see that the connection string here, is this. So it's, that's what it's being inserted into here. This right here. And so let's continue walking through. And here we just created the command. We created the connection. Now we're opening up the connection. As I said, it's important after you create your command to open up the connection. You have to do command.connection.open. And now we're replacing email over here with what the user entered. We're replacing password with what the user entered. We're executing that query. And now if reader.hasRows, false. And this is false because there doesn't exist a user with that email that I provided and with this password that I provided. The user doesn't exist. Remember, the password is test. So this user does not exist. There are no rows returned. And so it's just going to, go through here and return and eventually say user does not exist. So what we just ran was, let's copy this, show you guys the query. What we just ran was something like this. Well, it wasn't something like this. It was this. And then for the password, we did like some random text. I'm just going to execute this. You'll see it return no rows. So that's what the if reader.hasRows did. It checked if there's any rows to begin with because we don't want to do anything. So now let's just see what happens when we do this. And you'll see that it's returning me a row. So let's see what happens when we go and we enter correct information into our site. So first it's going to create a user, make it null. Email is this, password is this. Going to go create our connection, create our command, open up our connection, pass in the parameters, open up the SQL data reader. Now, does the reader have rows? Yes. The same thing here. Does the reader does this query return rows? Yes. Okay, then while we're traversing through this list, so if reader.read is going to read the first row that gets returned. So if reader.read, now it's going to execute all this, and I can show you guys this. So reader.getString, let's do phone. You can see that, so this is directly from the database now. 857, blah, blah, blah. So here, phone, 857, blah, blah, blah. It's the same data. So now it's mapping that database data into our object so that it populates our object so that we can use it later. So here it populated it. Great. And we'll just step through it, and you'll see that now our user has been filled. It's been mapped. We have the ID, we have the address, we have all the information because of this mapping right here. So we'll go ahead, we'll click play. And you'll see that now we're logged in. So let's continue on now. So let's go back to our slides here. So let's talk about, some ways that you can access the database. So I showed you guys, what I showed you guys here in the code, this is called inline queries, which means that the code, the SQL queries are written straight into the application. What you can also do is write stored procedures. Now, unfortunately, with the database that I'm using, with the server that I'm using, they don't allow stored procedures to be created, but most do. And if you have a local copy of a SQL Server, then you should be able to create stored procedures. But anyway, so the way that you would write that is like this. So for instance, if I wanted to copy, I have a function here that gets all the orders, right? So let's go to my data access layer, order DAL, and I have a thing here that says get order. So let me see. Okay. So where is completed orders? So anyway, I have a function here called get orders. And the query for that is straight up, select star from orders. Now, if I wanted to put this in a stored procedure, it would look like this. And then I could add like a parameter to do some additional filtering if I wanted. So for instance, I have a parameter here of completed, and if the user passed in completed equals 1, then this is actually backwards. So if completed equals 1, this should be select start from orders where service state is less than now. And if it's not completed, then select start from orders. But what I'm trying to get at here is that you can have a stored procedure do all the logic for you, the business logic, and that's stored in the database, the stored procedure. Some things about the stored procedure is that it's good for systems that aren't layered, as business logic can go within these stored procedures, and can get very complex very quickly. But so if you have like a layered application, it's okay to have that type of stuff inside of your application. Now that doesn't mean you can't use a stored procedure if you have layers within your application. It's just that your stored procedures will just need to have less logic and let the application do all that business logic. Some would say that stored procedures are more organized and more maintainable, since they're in one place. The ability to test the stored procedure without compiling and running your application. So let's say that something happens in live in your production environment. You don't have to redeploy your entire application. You could quickly test the stored procedure in QA, your QA environment, and then apply that fix into your live database without needing to deploy any code. The thing with it is, though, it's harder to debug. You can't breakpoint it, but what you can do is put a lot of prints. And imagine that the prints is like JavaScript's console logs. It's better security for SQL injections, as parameters have to be passed in. Now the thing is, though, inline queries are also okay as long as everything is parameterized. And like I mentioned earlier, no need to recompile the project if changes need to happen. So there would be no downtime. So the way that you would implement the SQL query into your application is like this. So let's go into our application. And let's say I wanted to use a stored procedure here for get orders. So what I would do is, I'm just going to go ahead and just comment this out for now. What I would do is I would do string SQL, and all you have to do, so our stored procedure here is called get orders. So what all I need to do is go here and do get orders. You just give it the name of the stored procedure. And so then that gets inserted in here. But the thing is here, right under the connection.open, what you need to tell it is command type equals system.data.command type and then stored procedure. So what this is telling the command is that you're not passing in a query, an inline query. You're passing in a stored procedure. So yeah, and then if you had parameters, you would do the same thing. You would do, for completed, let's say, you would do this. You pass that in, and now instead of parameters add with value, you would do add with value and then completed, and then either true or false, and then that's it. That's really how you would do that with a stored procedure. And then inline queries is essentially what I've been showing you guys this whole time. It's better for layered systems as there is no contract between like inline queries and the code. So you can write whatever you want. The queries are yours to control rather than being controlled by, maybe a database analyst who does stuff, or database administrator who does stuff in the database, and you don't know how that stored procedure works. There may be times where that's good, but for our case, we're not creating a complex system, so we don't have a database administrator, so this is okay. The responsibility for who does the logic is better understood, as the code wouldn't be everywhere. Now, again, like I mentioned before, though, you can have stored procedures for layered applications. Just don't put a lot of business logic in them, because if you have a lot of business logic in your stored procedures, a lot of business logic in your application, things are going to start getting confusing, and you may not know where to fix code if something ever happens. Now, the negative thing to this is with inline queries is that there's a high potential for SQL query duplication. But if you have a nice structured application, you really won't have to worry about this too much. Now, the other thing as well with inline queries is it requires you to build if you need to fix something in your code and you need to deploy it to the production environment, if you have inline queries, you're going to need to fix that inline query, and then you're going to need to redeploy your project to the production environment. So it's not as quick to fix, but it is easier to fix since you can put a breakpoint in it and traverse through it. And then there's always a possibility of SQL injection if the user's input aren't parameterized. So you really have to be careful using inline queries and make sure that everything that can be parameterized definitely is. So and then just keep in mind that the purpose of the data access layer is to access the data and do the mapping. So in this case, having inline queries is fine since we're doing all that. Now, you can still do a query in a stored procedure, return that in the stored procedure, like the orders, a list of orders, and then just do the mapping in the code. And also another benefit to doing inline queries is if your code gets too complex, Let's say that you put everything in a stored procedure and you have a lot of business logic for your code in the stored procedure. That will get too complex too quick. So the benefit, and then you'll have like this huge SQL query, all these if conditions, and then like building up this huge SQL query. Whereas if you do this all in the code, you construct a dynamic SQL query essentially using if statements and stuff. So you can make this query be as small as possible. That way it runs faster, it performs faster. So it's just better. You write better logic. You write better queries using inline queries if your business logic is too complex. Now, it doesn't mean that you also can't, do some complex stuff in stored procedures, but it's just going to be harder, and it's going to be harder for you to maintain and see what's actually happening later on. So anyway, I hope that helped. I hope you guys learned something, and remember to hit the like button if you like this video, if you learned something today, and don't forget to subscribe for whenever I create other videos. All right, thanks everyone. Have a good day.